On this episode of Death Row Stories, a drug deal in Texas turns deadly.
They were ambushed. They were massacred.
And a 17-year-old receives the ultimate punishment.
I believe a life for a life. I wanted justice for my son.
But when fateful mistakes are revealed...
They said the bullet was from his gun, and all of that was false.
A condemned man fights to save his life.
I was not his killer. I don't even remember his face. But he was dead. And I was going to die.
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered.
Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
Yeah, in the early 90s, there was a lot of murders in Houston. And there was a lot of drugs. Everybody, like, either they sell weed or they sell cocaine, crack. They would find people dead, getting killed over drug deals.
Among the victims of Houston's 1990s crime wave was a 19-year-old named Imaid Rasool. On May 14, 1992, Imaid stumbled into a Houston emergency room with gunshots to his face and foot. Police learned he'd been caught in a shootout in a nearby park, and that a young man named Adonis Collier may be dead.
Officers get to the scene. They find Adonis. There's a huge hole in the side of his head. They find an intact .25 caliber bullet and a small bag of cocaine. You don't have to be a genius to figure out when there's a bullet and there's dope and a dead body, it was some sort of a dope deal gone wrong. Houston, it's just always been a violent city with a lot of guns. But blowing somebody's head apart is an extraordinary crime.
When they told me that my son had got killed, my son, Adonis, I never would have thought it was going to be my child. I had him when I was 17 years old. He was very, very sentimental and a loving person. That night, we had dropped him off at his apartment, and we were downstairs laughing and talking, and I remember holding him, you know, and he left. That was my last memory.
Police soon learned that Adonis and his friend Imaid had gone to the park to cut a drug deal. There, they met up with two men, 17-year-old Nanon Williams and 22-year-old Val Guevara.
2.5 weeks after the shooting, Val lawyers up and surrenders himself. They make an agreement with him that he's going to receive a 10-year sentence for investing in a dope deal, and he's going to assist the prosecution.
This was supposed to be just a straight-up narcotics transaction, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Cocaine was crack cookies. It was, I think, about 5 ounces for $4,500 to $5,000. And Molly said that's all. Adonis and Nanon was to my right. And then I saw Molly, let me see the dope. And I chested one of them, and that's when the shooting started.
Val gives a graphic description of Nanon shooting Adonis with a shotgun.
And Nanon said, no witnesses. And he pulled the trigger. Then I just saw some feet fly in the air.
Nanon had arrived from LA, and while there were 3 felony warrants for him in California for 2 robberies and a police chase, he gravitates somehow to Val Guevara's apartment. Nanon tells Val, you know anybody who can sell us dope? And at some point, he decided to turn a dope deal into an aggravated robbery, capital murder. He was about as dangerous a human being as you would ever encounter.
3 months after the shooting, Nanon Williams was arrested in Los Angeles. In July 1995, he faced the death penalty at the Harris County Criminal Court. Vic Weisner prosecuted the case.
I've tried about 300 felonies, but this is a horrific case. There's no evidence Adonis or Maid were armed. They were ambushed. They were massacred. It was a case very deserving of death.
Adonis's mother watched the trial from the front row.
Nanon was just a big, mean-looking dude. He was a real angry kid. I wanted justice for my son, Adonis Collier.
Survivor Imaid Razul took the stand, testifying that he and Adonis had gone to the park to sell Nanon and Val drugs. Just a few minutes into the transaction, Nanon suddenly started shooting.
Imad testified that Nanon smiled at him, produced a .25 caliber weapon from his waistband and shot him in the face.
Weisner argued that after shooting Imaid, Nanon then shot Adonis with his .25 caliber pistol and a sawed-off shotgun. A state firearms expert confirmed that the bullets found in both Imaid and Adonis came from a .25 caliber gun.
We never recovered Nanon's weapons, the sawed-off shotgun and the .25. But it was a very strong case overall.
Val's girlfriend, Elaine Wynn, who rode with some of the men to the deal, testified that she saw Imaid and Val emerge from the park. Moments later, a shotgun blast tore through the night.
The only two people left at the dope deal were Nanon and Adonis. And unless Adonis committed suicide and Nanon stole the gun after the suicide, it was Nanon who blew Adonis's head apart.
Nanon's defense argued that none of the eyewitnesses could be trusted because they knew each other. But the jury's decision was swift: death by lethal injection.
When the jury sentenced him, he got lightheaded and the judge said, "Get him up, stand him up." I think he was just shocked that he had got the death penalty. I felt relieved because I believe a life for a life. I do.
Then they said, Nanon killed somebody. And I was like, he killed somebody? Selling drugs, I'm pretty sure I've sold drugs. Back then, it was just everybody just trying to make some money. But they're just going to kill now.
I was a kid. I didn't know Adonis Collier. I was not his killer. I don't even remember his face. He was dead, and I was going to die. As a child, I didn't know a single black male who hadn't been in prison. I looked at prison as a badge of honor, as stripes, as street cred. So my cultural values, they worked against me instead of for me.
Nanon Williams grew up in Southern California in the 1980s, where crime and drugs were a way of life.
I raised Nanon in the inner city of Los Angeles during a rough time. There was a lack of jobs, a lack of education. The drugs were rampant. It was a way out of poverty. Nanon was very adventurous, very smart. He always defended the weaker ones. Both of his fathers, biological father and stepfather, they were drug dealers, but they were not violent men. They were trying to support the family.
I learned things from my father, how to survive in the streets at a very early age. It was a culture where violence is respected more than being a good person. If my father had had a computer store to teach me a computer trade, perhaps I would have been a computer technician.
Nanon's stepfather ran a sizable drug operation. In 1985, he drew the attention of law enforcement.
It was 77 feds. They broke up our entire house and arrested myself and my husband and took all of my children in custody. That following February, Nanon's father was killed.
Nanon's mother raised him and his 3 siblings alone in South Central LA.
I was in nursing school and I was on welfare. Nanon was always trying to step up. And he started selling weed. And I told him, Nanon, don't do this. You see what happened to us.
In my mind, I needed to contribute. I wanted to be the man of the house. That led me to selling drugs. I felt I needed a gun for protection. You become comfortable doing things you shouldn't. And I became one of those kids.
When Nanon was 17, his path turned violent.
It's a Sunday afternoon. An elderly couple in their mid-60s gets home. 3 young men walking by ask, could you give us some water? One of the men has a gun. They duct tape and gag both of them. And they're stealing valuables. They torture them. There was one fingerprint that led to one suspect, and he led police to Nanon. Nanon, at that time, was an incredibly dangerous individual. There's no doubt Nanon was going to explode and kill somebody in the most horrific way.
A month after the home invasion, Nanon went to Houston with instructions to offload a drug haul. Nanon asked his cousin Troy for connections in Houston. Troy introduced him to 21-year-old Val Guevara.
At Val's apartment, everybody, we'd be there smoking weed, drinking. It was the hub for people to come buy drugs. I told Nanon, well, you probably could sell something to him.
Val Guevara had a dope house in an apartment, and I started wholesaling ounces of cocaine to them. They wanted more and more.
On May 13th, 1992, Nanon and Val arranged a drug deal with 2 men, Ahmed Razul and Adonis Collier.
We ended up going to this well-lit parking lot. We got out the vehicle. I was with Ahmed Razul the whole time. Somehow, Adonis and Val ended up walking to a dark area in the woods. I remember them arguing, and you heard a shot. And when you heard the shot, Ahmed pulled out a gun, and I wildly fired. And he took off running. And then you heard a loud boom.
After the shotgun blast, Nanon says he ran back to the car and met up with Val, and that they fled the scene together.
Everyone's nervous and it's quiet. We stopped at the apartment, which was not very far away. I got out the car. After that, I never saw them again.
Nanon went on the run back to LA. He was arrested 3 months later.
When they said a murder, I thought I killed Ahmed Razul. And in my ignorance, I also believed in the system. I became the target because I would not cooperate. And it led to ruining my life and my family's life.
At 20 years old, Nanon became one of over 400 inmates on Texas death row. There, he met fellow prisoner Anthony Graves.
The day that they were walking me to my cell for the first time, I remember one guard start screaming and shouting at the inmates. At the end of the hallway is this big old emblem that says, Texas Death Row.
Anthony Graves was exonerated in 2010. He became the 138th man freed from death row.
I seen inmates shank each other. I seen an inmate rape an inmate. That's how violent it can be.
When I arrived, I was 20 years old. It felt like the world was against me. I fought everything.
One day, I seen this big guy come in. He liked to wrestle in everybody. And in my mind, it's like, this big old bully, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to deal with this dude, right?
Death row was a battlefield. The tattoos that I got, they were a shield to tell you I was bad, I was tough. But that's not who I was. I was scared to death.
Nanon and I, we ended up walking one day, introducing ourselves. And I learned a few things about his case that was appalling.
Anthony realized that I wasn't a bully. I was angry. I was so angry from losing everything that I had.
3 years after his conviction, a new team of lawyers took on Nanon's appeals in 1998.
The state's theory was that the group went in the park to do a drug deal, except Nanon Williams pulls out his guns and starts shooting to commit a robbery. Unbeknownst to anybody in the park, they put on evidence from a ballistics examiner that that bullet that was taken from the victim's head was a .25 caliber bullet, which matched Nanon Williams's gun. But once we started digging into the case, we learned that their witness lied and that ballistics evidence was false. The actual jurors would not have convicted him had they known the true nature of the bullet.
2 years after Nanon Williams landed on death row, his new attorney started looking into another person with an opportunity to have committed the murder.
After Valgavar was arrested, he's immediately charged with capital murder. His lawyer tells the police department and the district attorney that he's willing to cooperate, and every month the charge slowly gets reduced. So it goes from capital murder to conspiracy to sell cocaine to illegal investment.
Nanon had been accused of shooting Adonius with a .25 caliber pistol, as well as a shotgun. But neither weapon was recovered. Police, however, did find a third weapon.
Shortly after the crime, they searched Valgavar's apartment and seized Valgavar's gun.
Did you take any weapons with you?
Yes, sir. It was a .22 Dandy.
And how many shots did you fire from your gun?
Me, I fired from one.
Who were you pointed at when you fired?
I ain't really down this direction, but you know, he was getting back up again.
Valgavar admitted that he fired his .22 Derringer, but said that he didn't harm anybody. For some reason, the Houston Police Department never tested Valgavar's gun. It just seemed inconceivable that they wouldn't test the only firearm they recovered in conjunction with a capital murder.
Nanon's attorneys now asked to see the bullet recovered from Adonius Collier to determine whether it matched Nanon's .25 caliber gun or Val's .22. Independent firearms expert Ronald Singer examined the evidence.
When the bullet passes down the barrel of a firearm, it picks up markings that are considered to be unique for each barrel. When you have a suspect bullet, you test fire that firearm and compare it to that bullet.
It was a strong case against Nanon at trial. The Harris County firearms examiner assured the jury that that bullet taken from the victim's head was from Nanon's gun and not from Valgavar's gun.
A competent firearm examiner can tell the difference between a .25 caliber and a .22 caliber bullet with the naked eye. A .25 caliber bullet is a larger bullet than a .22 caliber bullet. It wasn't until we got the evidence that they realized their error.
We made a mistake. The bullet in Adonius's head is not a .25, it's a .22. And in fact, we matched it to Val's gun. Any person believing the first ballistics identification would believe that the only person who ever shot anybody was Nanon. It's an inexcusable error, and especially in a death penalty case.
It's incumbent upon any defense lawyer to challenge each part of the state's case. And Nanon's trial lawyer did not do that in this case. And she explained that she was an ex-prosecutor. She knew the state's firearms examiner and thought he was competent and wouldn't really make a mistake.
The firearms examiner had an excellent reputation for accuracy, but everybody makes mistakes.
If we had known at trial that this bullet was from Valgavar's gun and not from Nanon Williams' gun, how would the jury have seen the evidence?
With it now clear that Adonius had been shot by Val Guevara's gun, in 1998, Nanon's appeals team filed for a new trial.
At the time, Texas death row was overcrowded. We had over 100 men waiting to be executed. Our system has painted them as the worst of the worst. It can make you very bitter because you're being treated less than a human being.
I saw guys literally drugged from their cell because they don't want to walk to their death. It's hard to get that out of your mind. I wanted to show that they were people. And I started my own newsletter. It was called the Williams Report.
The Williams Report provided an intimate account of life on death row and profiled what Nanon perceived to be grave injustices in the cases of his fellow inmates. With the help of his family, Nanon distributed the Williams Report to a growing readership in the outside world.
Nanon, I always want to talk about something constructive. We could talk about politics, social justice. Nanon did everything he could to shine light on prison conditions, exposing the criminal justice system for what it was.
I didn't realize by interviewing other prisoners, I would delve so much into their lives. I was chronicling what took place on Texas death row. My writing, it became my sword.
Nanon was a warrior for a cause, and they tried to silence him. Now, we're all in isolation, but they also have a cell called a management cell, where it's just a steel door, you can't see anything, and that's where they would put Nanon.
I know what it's like to live in a cell so black. You can't see your own hand in front of your face. So it makes you wonder if you're alive. When you're trapped in your mind, the fears you have, the depression you have, the sense of loss, it becomes circular. For many people, it drives them to commit suicide. For me, writing allowed me to construct a new world. It gave me a sense of freedom.
In September 1998, Nanon received a hearing to argue that the state's faulty firearms testimony had unfairly influenced the jury.
How do you look at a case like this and think that the process worked? Because that's really the question is, do we have confidence in the outcome?
Prosecutor Lynn Hardaway argued against Nanon's appeal.
Capital murder is a big deal. We don't want there to be mistakes. We just started trying to talk to as many people who knew Val Guevara or Nanon Williams. In the offense report, there were a lot of references to a person who had driven Val and Nanon Williams to the scene. We interviewed a couple of different people at the Harris County Jail, and one of them gave us the name Patrick Smith.
Lynn eventually tracked down Smith, who said he'd driven Nanon and Val to the park that night. Smith also confided to Lynn that he'd seen who'd murdered Adonius Collier.
Patrick said that he could see what was going on very well, and that Nanon shot Adonius in the head with the shotgun. It was a stroke of luck that I found Patrick. The investigator for the DA's office at trial had never been able to locate him. He was living in California. Probably he didn't really care to be found.
Patrick claimed he had only recently met Nanon, Val Guevara, and Val's girlfriend Elaine Wynn when he agreed to drive them to the park the night of the shooting.
Patrick Smith, he was sitting in the car with Elaine Wynn, and they're kind of talking back and forth, and then they hear shots. He pulls up the car to see better what's going on, and he saw Nanon standing over Adonius with a shotgun. And that Adonius was still alive when Nanon shot him in the head. Regardless of a misidentification of the bullets, that doesn't take away from the fact that Nanon ultimately killed Adonius Collier.
The testimony of Patrick Smith is contradicted by the state's witnesses. Elaine Wynn says there's no way that Patrick Smith could have seen into the park and seen anything that happened, and she's sitting next to him.
Patrick testified he could see key events from his perspective in the park, and he said that the park was very well lit. I thought he was very credible.
Nanon's attorneys did not believe Patrick Smith was telling the truth. They turned to veteran investigator Richard Reyna for help.
They wanted to find out who shot who had a shotgun. The guy that could really tell me was Ahmad Rasul, the person that got shot and didn't die. If Nanon shot him, then he was holding the shotgun and a gun. So how could they make a drug deal? I went to see Ahmad. He says when they got out of the car, he walked with Nanon Williams. And then all of a sudden, Val disappears. So it was just the two of us. And I said, was Nanon carrying a shotgun? He says, no, he did not have a shotgun. Nanon Williams was wearing a very flimsy T-shirt. You couldn't have hidden anything in there.
Ahmad Rasul probably has the least incentive to lie in this case. And he is adamant that Nanon could not have had a shotgun.
Contrary to Ahmad, at trial, Val and Elaine had testified that Nanon entered the park wearing a thick jacket.
One of the real problems with this case is that everyone does have some sort of self-interest to lie. Val Guevara and Elaine Wynn were able to shape the narrative and the investigation. They're good friends with Patrick Smith. We find out later that Val Guevara had known him for years. The other thing that's very concerning about Elaine Wynn's testimony is that Elaine Wynn was sleeping with Val Guevara and had dated the deceased victim.
Elaine was angry that my son broke up with her. I think she set him up. You can't tell me that you jumped in a Jeep with some guys with some rifles and you didn't know they were gonna kill him.
Nanon was from California, hadn't known these folks so long. He was the only juvenile that was out there, and in some ways an easy target.
People deserve to know the truth.
Texas executes more children than any other government in the world. And we should hang our heads in shame when people accuse us of barbarism.
In the early 2000s, Nanon Williams was one of 31 juvenile offenders awaiting execution when lawmakers called on Texas Governor Rick Perry to abolish the death penalty for crimes committed under the age of 18.
The same things that make persons with intellectual disability less responsible for their acts apply directly to juveniles. The developing human brain is much more impulsive, and we don't think about the consequences of things, even the best and brightest of kids.
6 years into Nanon's sentence, the criminal court gave him new hope when it recommended he receive a new trial. It would be up to the Court of Criminal Appeals whether to grant it. Meanwhile, Capital Defense Attorney Walter Long, an expert on the juvenile death penalty, joined Nanon's team.
Nanon was actually a good friend of my former client, Napoleon Beasley, who was executed in 2002. Napoleon's case became a very prominent case in the national effort to abolish the death penalty for children. In Nanon's case, there was no evidence of any conspiracy to commit a murder, much less a robbery. This never should have been tried as a capital murder case. It is just not. Texas has a reputation as a pretty bloodthirsty state. Executions happen here on a routine basis.
I was labeled a monster. And looking at all the men die, I wanted to make my family proud. And I knew I couldn't do that through talking about my case. I could only do it through character, through sheer will to accomplish things that none of the men around me could.
Since arriving on death row, Nanon has published 3 books, including a collection of poems. He also earned undergraduate and master's degrees in literature.
I've lived an abnormal life, and I learned that I could just be honest and put the mistakes I've made on the table, and people will listen. My writing allowed me to be a contributing member to society, and that keeps me going.
Nanon at that time was a product of his environment. But then he was taken off of these streets. And Nanon discovered Nanon Williams.
In the spring of 2002, Nanon's chance at redemption was cut short. In a one-paragraph order, the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals denied him a new trial.
The court gave no indication of its reasoning, so there was no way to determine whether its decision-making process was reasonable at all.
They simply said, we disagree with some of the fact findings and some of the legal conclusions, without specifying which fact findings or which legal conclusions.
The system is designed to push everything toward the execution date before there's been full and fair consideration of all the relevant facts. We have an authoritarian culture here.
In the wake of the court's decision, several of Nanon's jurors signed affidavits stating if they had known about the botched firearms analysis, they may not have sentenced him to death.
And I'm sure the jurors were very well-meaning, but if you let them read the testimony of Patrick Smith, I'm sure they'd be very confident that they did the right thing. Cases are retried all the time, but Nanon would be right back where he's at. You have my word on that.
After 8 years on death row, Nanon had exhausted all of his state appeals. Walter and Morris would now turn to the federal courts. But while preparing their appeal, they discovered that Val Guevara, in addition to firing the .22 caliber bullet that hit Adonius, was now changing his story.
From the very beginning, we've been asking for any statements that Val Guevara had made to the prosecutors while he was negotiating his plea. The judge finally agreed that the prosecution turned over this audio recording of Val Guevara that they took in August of 1998.
In his original statement, Val told police he'd been standing with a maid Razul, while Nanon was with the victim, Adonius Collier.
Did you ever see Nanon shoot the 25? Or was
No,
it just...
I didn't see
Okay.
anything. And me and Adonis was talking about all this, and it's just kicked off.
Okay. And so you took off and you turned around and shot. You busted 2 cats, right?
Oh, shot once.
Just once, okay.
And so he admitted that he, in fact, was the one talking with Adonius Collier, and that Nanon was over to the side talking to Ahmad Rasul, which was different than his trial testimony, where he put Nanon with Adonius Collier.
It's astounding. The ballistics evidence establishes beyond a shadow of a doubt that Guevara shot Collier in the head and is culpable of some kind of a homicide. The state doesn't charge Guevara with capital murder. So something's really, really stinky there.
We offered Val Guevara an agreement before we knew the bullet was misidentified. Every criminal wants to get out of their situation. We basically rolled out a red carpet for him to do it when we misidentified the bullet.
In exchange for his testimony against Nanon, Val received a 10-year sentence. After 4 years in prison, he came up for parole.
We were always given a list of people eligible for parole, and I see the son of a gun's name. And I just wanted to let the Board of Pardons and Paroles know he got away with murder. Keep this SOB in prison as long as you can.
Vic Wiseman, my prosecutor, wrote a letter to Val Guevara's parole board stating that he knew Val Guevara lied at trial. But here I sit, convicted of robbing a man and killing a man, and I never said a single word to him.
Val was a horrible witness, and he escaped justice for a very serious crime. Has nothing to do with Nanon's guilt. There's no doubt Nanon blew Adonius' head apart with a shotgun.
There's no statute of limitations on murder, so they could possibly charge Val Guevara with Mr. Collier's murder.
Something's wrong with that picture. I think everybody should be doing life. Once you play a role, you should be held accountable.
As Nanon waited for word on his federal appeal, the highest court in the land decided to take a closer look at the juvenile death penalty.
During that time, Texas was continuing to set execution dates for child offenders.
This is a horrific case, and I'm not embellishing. Nanon Williams is a very dangerous individual, and with the exception of his age, I'd say a no-brainer for the death penalty.
Since 1990, only 7 countries other than the United States have executed juvenile offenders. Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the People's Republic of China. Since then, each of these countries has either abolished or made public disavowal of the practice. It is fair to say the United States now stands alone in a world that has turned its face against the juvenile death penalty.
Good evening. The Supreme Court today declared that the execution of juvenile murderers is unconstitutional. That ruling overturns the death sentences of 72 murderers who were under 18 when they committed their crime.
I think there's a strong probability Nanon would have been executed if the Supreme Court hadn't barred the execution of juveniles. The Supreme Court recognized that juveniles have a different level of culpability when they're 16, 17 years old. They're not making rational decisions all the time.
I don't make any apologies for seeking the death penalty. I think it was the right thing to do. When you change the law from 17 to 18, why not make it 19 or 20? Unless it's based on empirical evidence, it's just a number picked out of the air.
In Nanon's case, it's unclear exactly why the shooting started. This was a bunch of young people in a park doing a drug deal, and if someone gets spooked, you can see how just it immediately goes out of control.
At 17 years old, you know right from wrong. When they took him off of death row, I want him to serve the rest of his life in jail. He's not a person that you want back in society. I don't think he's changed.
Nanon put himself in this position, and he can't get around the fact that he blew a hole in Adonius Collier's head and killed him. Even though not the cleanest proceeding, I think ultimately the right decision was made, and I think Nanon Williams is where he should be.
I feel bad I even introduced him to these people. I didn't think it'd be like this. Yeah, I feel guilty about it every day.
In 2012, the federal courts rejected Nanon's appeal. He is now serving a life sentence.
I sold drugs. I owe something for that. Although I didn't kill Adonius Collier, I'm responsible for the actions that occurred that night. I wondered, in a parallel universe, if I could have been him or he could have been me. More than anything, I remember his mother and my mother, 2 women grieving a loss. And I've never forgotten that.
Nanon is not a danger to society. I want him set free. He wrote one poem to me, Dear Mama, from a quiet sleep in the dead of the night, I awake with a single tear, clear and cold as it ran down my face, because I thank God that you care. Even when I stand alone and no one is there, sometimes, not often, I wish I could turn back the hands of time and make myself a little boy again.
I do believe in second chances because I do know there's a good and bad that works in all of us. It's the choices we're making. I watched a young man come as a bully, turn into an intellectual, writing books, always trying to help other people on their cases. How is it that society don't think people can change?
Nanon Williams might have reformed. I doubt it. He's a social justice fantasy.
My sentence said I was a waste of time. So I made it a point to reach for higher education. I spend my days here teaching. It's the only thing I have to give. I do these things to prove that even people who are judged the worst of us can become the best of us. Life is still moving, and I'm a part of it. As long as I'm breathing, I'll win.